Hi everybody, it's You Had to Ask, the show where I answer your questions, and my first question this week comes from Louis Wallenberg, who asks, Steve, are Stuffy, Benson, and the rest of the Talking Animal cast part of your own personality, or are their personalities influenced from other sources? You know, it's funny, when I thought about it, when I first read your question, it occurred to me that Toby Benson originally, his character isn't based on another person so much, but I remember the first time I did the Toby Benson voice, the first time I picked up the dog and did the Toby Benson voice, the first thing that he said was, "Where's my money?" And that was sort of his personality for a long time, is that he wanted his money. He just was always asking about money. And I think I got that from a guy that I used to work with. A long time ago, I worked for an outfit selling vacuum cleaners door to door, believe it or not. And one of the guys that I worked with, I remember him messing around with the young child of another colleague of ours, and he was just trying to get the kid to laugh, and just kind of messing around with him. And he kept asking this little like 5-year-old boy, "Where's my money? Where's my money? Where's my money?" And the kid would laugh because it was absurd, because But so when I started making Toby Benson talk, just to amuse my wife, that was the first thing that he said was, "Where's my money?" And that became like his thing for a while, and then it just sort of grew from there, kind of organically. Like, we would just add things to it, because as I said in the last episode when Ashley was here, we would both, and still we both will do the voices to amuse ourselves with the animals, and we each sort of add things to the characters every now and then. Like, that's where the character of Millicent came from. Millicent was this dog that we got at Toys R Us because we saw the dog, and just thought it was a really funny, cute looking little stuffed dog. And Ashley came up with the voice and the basic character on the drive home. Like, that's almost all Ashley coming up with that, with the Millicent character, the preoccupation with her breed and the sort of snooty attitude and the high pitched voice. That was all Ashley's doing. And Stuffy is just the best case scenario for a person, as I see it. Stuffy is just good. He's goodness exemplified as nearly as I can do it, and that's basically his character. He's just good. He's just a good person. Jack McPherson is an Irish drunken stereotype. There's really no way around it. I try to get around making him such a flat, obvious stereotype by having him be kind of depraved, which in a way sort of steers into that stereotype even more. But I feel like if I take it far enough, then he becomes his own character. And I think of him as his own person now. I don't think of him as just a funny sort of stereotypical drunken Irishman. I think of him as Jack, as a person, and he has his own little character quirks. But they grow sort of organically. The more you perform them, the more you talk as the characters, and the more now that I write things for them, the more I write for them, the better I sort of get to know them. Jim Smith: Hey Steve, are there any movies that after just one viewing really changed the way you see a particular issue? For example, Full Metal Jacket significantly altered my perception of war with its depiction of dehumanization. The movie that comes to mind is the movie Dead Man Walking, directed by Tim Robbins, starring Sean Penn and Susan Sarandon. I think I saw it the same year it came out, and I was 15, I think, when the movie came out, and it had I was already pretty much on my way to being anti-death penalty at that point, but it changed my thinking on that topic, in the sense that it brought in the the issue of compassion and humanity. Because one of the most moving things about Dead Man Walking is that it shows you a man who is really a bad person. He's not an innocent man who's been wrongly convicted on death row, and it's not like a tug your heartstrings sort of tearjerker movie. It's very straight and very seriously, artfully done. And the guy on death row, Matthew Poncelet, the guy who Sean Penn portrays, is shown to be a really bad guy. and yet you can't help, at least from my perspective, I can't help as a viewer, but feel for him and feel a sense of sadness at his life and his death, even though there's nothing in the movie done to redeem him, other than just showing him to be a human being with layers and with facets and with a personality and with emotions. And that was meaningful to me for both my view on the death penalty, to sort of look at it from that perspective and to think, even a really terrible person is still a person. And even though they may not deserve to be free, they may not deserve to have all of the privileges of citizenship of a more law-abiding, less dangerous person, there's still something about just the fact that they're a sentient person with thoughts and feelings that grants them a kind of irreducible humanity that should always be considered, no matter how horrible they are. And it gives them just some basic fundamental right to exist, if nothing else. And that movie really brought that home to me and really got me to think about that for the first time. And it was also influential on me as a writer, and not just as things I've written myself, but on my own thoughts about writing, maybe as a critic even more than as a writer. Because one of the best tricks to use as a storyteller in order to sort of come up with well-rounded characters that aren't just flat types or sort of plot-shaped characters that exist only to do certain things in stories, is to come up with a really terrible character, like a villainous character, a murderer, a rapist, a really horrible person, and then to think to yourself as the writer, why would anybody like this person? That's a really good exercise, to think of a really horrible character and then to try to come up with reason, try to humanize that character. And it can work. It can make a really good story, or it can just be a way of exercising your muscles as a writer. But it's a really good exercise. And Dead Man Walking, I think, is a good example of that sort of thing, of taking a really horrible character in terms of his morality and in terms of his ethical character, and showing him as a person and as something, as someone to be sympathized with and shown compassion. Here's one from Isaac Barlow. Okay, Steve, I took 2 weeks to gather this question to ask, so here it goes. I'm in love with two women, and they love me as well. And I do mean love. And I love everything that makes them special, and I love everything about the both of them, and I just can't bring myself to choose. And I don't want to lose either one of them, and I know I'm selfish, and I want to be honest with them both because I do love them. So my question is, do you think it's possible to fall in love with two people at the same time? Oh yeah, absolutely. It's definitely possible. I don't have any cause to doubt the sincerity of your feelings at all. It's it's not the sort of thing that's really for me, but I have known people and know people even now who are in what's from the outside looking in seem to me to be reasonably successful polyamorous relationships. I worked with a guy for years who was in a polyamorous relationship, and it again. I mean, I wasn't on the inside. I don't know for a fact, but from all indications, from what everybody said and how everybody behaved, it seemed like it worked really well for everybody involved. The problem I see in your question is you say you want to be honest with both of them. It seems like the two people you're in love with don't maybe know that that like each one doesn't know that you're in love with another person. And I mean that's the implication that seems to be there in your question. And I mean, the first step in loving two people and is making sure that the two people know that they both exist and that they're okay with that. And then that might be a problem, because as I said, I mean, polyamorous relationships can work, but like I know they're not really my thing. I wouldn't really be comfortable in something like that. And it's possible that one or both of the girls you're in love with wouldn't be cool with something like that either. So you probably should hash that out first. Maybe after that you might not have to choose. Maybe one of them or both of them will choose for you, or maybe they'll decide they're cool with it. I don't know. Kevin Nyberg. Hey Steve, you are very polished with your arguments in favor of atheism, and opposition to theism, but what advice do you have for we atheists who are confident in our atheism, but who are not as skilled in critically explaining our position to others? In particular, when in discussion with a theist friend, how can we avoid making the same logical cover-ups that they make when we as atheists get tripped up trying to explain ourselves? An illustration of this problem might be the substitution of, well, Jesus said, for, well, Christopher Hitchens said. That's a really good illustration of a potential problem. And to me, the best way to get around that is when you read the argument that, say, Christopher Hitchens is making, you need to get to the point where you really understand the argument enough that you can put it in your own words, that you don't have to quote Hitchens like scripture and say, well, according to Christopher Hitchens, he says blah, blah, blah. If you understand the argument he's making, you can make the argument yourself. And you don't have to refer to Hitchens. You can just make it yourself in your own words. And the best way to do that is to read from lots of different philosophers, authors, whatever. Don't just read Hitchens. Don't just read Sam Harris or Richard Dawkins. Read Bertrand Russell. Read Robert Ingersoll. Read Thomas Paine, who wasn't an atheist but made some really brilliant anti-Christian arguments. Read the arguments that other people have made, the articulate, intelligent, forceful arguments, and read them and think about them until you get to the point where you can really grasp them and understand them for yourself, and you can rephrase them, because that's the real test. That's how you know you've really comprehended it, is when you can take the essence of it and you can spit it back out in your own words and make it sound like something you would say. That's what you really have to do. That's the key. But the other thing is to consider is one of them. The main reason why I and why other YouTube atheists who are a lot more articulate than I am, and like Hitchens was, like Dawkins is, like Sam Harris is, and Daniel Dennett, etc. The main reason for that level of erudition with these arguments is that they make them all the time because they're really interested in the conversation, and they're talking with people both who agree with them and disagree with them, like, all the time, because they're really interested in it. But they don't have to do that. If you feel like you're being put upon, like you have to make these arguments, but you don't really want to, I would recommend that you just don't have conversations you don't want to have. I mean, you don't owe anybody an explanation. You don't have to explain your atheism in great detail and at a very high intellectual level to people. You don't owe people an explanation. And if the explanation isn't fun or interesting for you, I would suggest just skipping it. But if it's important to you, like it is to me, and you want to speak very highly and very strongly for your atheism, then what I said a minute ago is the way to do it. Just read the arguments, think about the issues, think about the questions, and come up with your own answers. And that's really not just the best way, that's the only way to do it. Mr. Croup, hey Steve, are there any themes or ideas or the like that when you encounter them, you recognize either an inability to or all but prohibitive difficulty in being rational about? Have you ever felt doubt about whether you were being rational, analyzed, then been unable to determine to your satisfaction whether or not you were? I can't think of any themes or ideas that I'm incapable of being rational about. The closest I can come to is certain themes that I encounter in stories that I'm just a sucker for, and that maybe I'm less critical in the presence of than other things. Like space exploration, or like certain themes of heroism or sacrifice, or like themes of relationship and friendship and brotherhood. I think I tend to be less critical, or at least maybe not even less critical, just more predisposed to liking things that feature those themes and do those themes very well than I would otherwise. So I think there are things that I would say I'm a sucker for. I don't think there's anything, at least nothing off the top of my head, that I would say just robs me of my rationality, where I see something and I'm like, oh, there's no way I can possibly have an objective opinion about this. I not like that, but Baseball is another one. Like really like bullshit lyrical philosophizing about baseball. It just gets me every time, and and I can even recognize it after the fact. You know, it's like when you're watching a movie and you're just totally engrossed in the movie as the movie is on, and then once the movie is over, you think about it for a second and you go, God, that movie was bullshit. But while the movie is playing, it completely sucks you in, and that's how a lot of these themes are for me. I can think about it after the fact and go, yeah, I don't know, maybe if not for this and this, it's not very good, but it completely draws me in while I'm in the moment with it. Mustang 630. Hey Steve, are there any movies you recognize as being good or great but don't like to watch? For example, I think No Country for Old Men is a brilliant film, but I find it a little disturbing and resist rewatching it. And Lawrence of Arabia is amazing, but I can't bring myself to only watch part of it, yet it's so freaking long I can't sit down and watch the whole thing. Do you have a movie you appreciate but can't bring yourself to sit through again? The first movie that comes to mind is one that I think is on a lot of people's lists of these kinds of movies, and it's the movie Dancer in the Dark. I think I've only watched it once. I watched it with my wife once, like 4 or 5 years ago. It's been a long time, and I thought it was just like incredible. I thought it was great, and I hate musicals, as I've mentioned a few times in these videos. As a rule, I just detest the whole genre of musicals. But I thought Dancer in the Dark was just an amazing film, and I had like a lump in the pit of my stomach when it was over. It was very affecting, and I think because it was so affecting and because it's so dark, and it's so sad and tragic, and it really hits you. It's not just tragic in the abstract where you think, yeah, that was unfortunate. Like it really gets you. At least it does me. And I just haven't watched it since. I don't know if I'm sure now that I know everything that's going to happen, maybe it wouldn't be as affecting, or maybe it would. I don't know, but that would definitely be at the top of my list. And as for films that, for the other reason that maybe they're too long, or I sort of admire them intellectually, but I can't really get into them enough to want to watch them again. There are lots of movies that I feel that way about. Birth of a Nation, which is difficult to watch because it's so incredibly fucking racist. Like it's the most racist movie ever, and yet it's also a brilliant film. Like I don't feel there's any way I can deny it. I mean, it's just a brilliant movie. It's one of the most important films ever made. It's a masterpiece in so many ways. But it has just the most uncomfortable level of racism you can possibly imagine in a movie. It's so fucking racist that it's difficult to watch. It's hard to watch. It's hard to imagine watching that movie just for pleasure. Just, well, got a few hours here. I'll put on a movie. I know, Birth of a Nation. Why would you ever choose Birth of a Nation? So that's one. I saw a reconstruction a long time ago, maybe 10, 12 years ago, of Erich von Stroheim's Greed, which in its original cut was like a 9-hour movie, and then was hacked down to like a 2-hour movie, and then was restored using the original shooting script and some production photographs and motion capture cameras, or not motion capture cameras, but anyway, to sort of stretch it back out and reconstruct the original story, and got it up to about 4 hours again. That was really fascinating to watch once. There's a lot of it that's very tedious. It feels like homework watching it. It feels like you should watch it. It's a good thing to watch it, but it feels like not maybe the sort of thing you want to just watch just when you feel like watching a movie. So those would be a couple examples. So. And you know what that sound means? It means that it's time for really, my favorite part of the show. It's time for
the lightning round. Rapid fire questions, glib and adequate answers.
Troubleshooter 125. How about this, Steve? What do you have for breakfast in the morning? Do you and Ashley do anything special about breakfast on the weekend? My usual breakfast, if I even have breakfast, is a cup of coffee and some toast and maybe a couple of eggs. On the weekend, or if we have a little extra time, occasionally, very occasionally, we might go out to breakfast somewhere. There's a couple of local places around here that we go to every once in a while, and I usually get the same thing. I just get eggs and toast and coffee, nothing super special. Kenneth Katona, if you could live the life of any fictional character, which character would it be? God. You militant atheist piece of shit. Nixon 1972. Of all the apologetics books you've read, which did you find to be the most ridiculous? Well, of all the books I've reviewed in the An Atheist Reads series to this point, by far the most ridiculous and worthless was the Rick Warren book, The Purpose Driven Life. There's no reason for that book to exist. It's completely worthless. But technically, that's not an apologetics book. That's more of like a devotional. So of the proper apologetics books, the one I have the lowest opinion of is the one I did most recently, the Josh McDowell book, Evidence That Demands a Verdict. It's just a completely ridiculous, dishonest, really, really stupid book. Cinema Nerd 14. How do you distinguish between pretentious, intelligent people versus non-pretentious, intellectual people? Do you think there is much of a difference between the two? Yeah, there's a difference, but you can't tell them apart. But there is a difference. But you'll just never know which is which. That's what makes it fun. SC Ruler Shinoda. Cairo Almighty, Steve, your wife is amazing. How'd you hook her? I lied and I told her I was pregnant. By the time she figured it out, it was too late. Dr. Themo, have you ever worked retail during Black Friday? I've never worked retail properly, but I used to work maintenance at a truck stop, and I worked, 5 or 6 Black Fridays in a row, and I saw enough to have a great pity in my heart for anyone who works retail on Black Friday. Special Buzz Juice. Steve, who do you think is the best living author in the English language? As I see it, it's a dead heat between John Irving and T.C. Boyle, but Joyce Carol Oates might have something to say about that. Who are some of your favorites? Well, this would be a much better question for my wife, who is much better read than I am. The only suggestions that I would add are maybe Annie Proulx. I've really enjoyed what I've read from Annie Proulx. And maybe Michael Chabon. But again, much more of a wife question. In fact, she's right over here, dude.
Well, I would always say Joyce Carol Oates.
Joyce Carol Oates? Yeah, she says Joyce Carol Oates.
But
So.
I'm biased, as you say.
Yeah. Fontemos Child. Your wife did not take your last name? Hashtag Steve Shives is a mangina. Well, you'll notice that I didn't take hers either. So by my reckoning, that makes us even. And Nico Fair. Hello, Steve. I notice you wear a Superman tee a lot, which brings me to the question, what 2 superpowers would you most like to have of Superman's? Cheers, Nick. The 2 I would most like to have, obviously flying, of course. There's levitation, Holmes. And probably the invulnerability. That would be cool. I would say the strength, but if people found out you were that strong, they would always be asking you to do shit for them. And I mean, who wants to help people move like every weekend? Oh, call Steve, he'll help you. He's got super strength. No, fuck that. So that's it for the questions. Before I get out of here this week, I want to do a shout out, as always. And this week, the shout out goes to Ozymandias Ramses II. No, not the Egyptian pharaoh. The YouTuber. I've been thinking a lot lately, the last few weeks, again, about the presuppositional argument for the existence of God. And I was in a Google Plus hangout with Christopher Mauti and Live Life, the host of the Skeptic Fence show, and a couple other guys. We were talking a lot about, Dark Matter was there, and DPR Jones, and we were talking about the presuppositional argument, and one of the best, if not the best, rebuttals to the presup argument that I've ever heard was made by Ozymandias Ramses II, Ozzy. And you can see that rebuttal on his channel, along with a lot of other great content, and it comes very, very highly recommended. He's just incredibly intelligent, intimidatingly intelligent, to the point where you almost just want to agree with everything he says, because you fear if you disagree with him, he will not only show how wrong you are, but he will then make your disagreeing argument better than you ever could have made it yourself. That's the kind of clarity and sharpness and intelligence the guy has. So if you haven't checked out his YouTube channel and checked out his stuff, please go do so right away. Ozymandias Ramses II. Very, very highly recommended. So that's it for this week. I will be back to do this all again next week, provided, of course, that you ask me some questions, because for me to do this, first, you have to ask. So leave a comment on this video with your question for next time. Ask me anything about anything. No topic is too serious. No topic is too silly. I will answer as many of them as I possibly can, and I will see you next time.